A couple questions right off the top here. The House passed a requirement this week that their members must actually travel to and from their home in order to get taxpayer reimbursement. Many lawmakers in the past have used the per diem as a salary supplement. In your opinion, why was that ever allowed, and when did it become a good idea for taxpayers to be paying for trips that never actually happened?
I don't know that that's the case. You have to pay for it. You have to actually make trips to be compensated for them, and that is what the rule of the House has always been. That's what the rule of the Senate is. Putting it in statute, it's just an additional belt and suspenders to what the rules of the House and the Senate already are.
And finally, to put that in statute, why? I mean, it just seems like that would have been a no-brainer right from the top. That indeed, if you're going to turn this form in, you should have made the trips.
Yeah, that's what the rules of the House and the Senate have been, and I guess you'd have to ask the House that. It's something that they chose to do, to put a belt and suspenders on the issue. I think it's just fine. There's no problem with that. Democrats
kind of go back and point to your challenge in the last 6 months or so of whether you were still living in Kettering, a case that you won, incidentally. But they're still having a field day. As a matter of fact, they put out a press release yesterday with a Google map to your home, suggesting that you might need the Google map to get there. Will this be a political liability for you, do you think, as you enter the fall campaign?
Not at all. They should have visited me. I was there yesterday, it'd be it's one of those things where I follow the law. The problem is that they don't, they challenged that question, and the Supreme Court agreed with me by a 7-0 majority that I have followed the rules and played by the rules, and I think that's just a reflection on the fact that they don't really think they can beat me in the election. They've already started to throw mud, well before they even actually had a candidate for the race. They've had to switch candidates 3 times out of the fact that they just don't believe that they have a chance to win the election come November. And the tactics that they're already employing are just another kind of tactic that the voters are going to reject.
Let me ask you about the primary very quickly here. You do have a primary opponent, Sandra O'Brien, who says she identifies with the Tea Party movement. She says you voted to increase the gasoline tax by 6 cents a gallon, voted to increase Ohio sales tax, and voted to implement the new cat tax on food. Is that a fair argument?
During my time as Speaker of the House, in the legislature, I led the most fiscally conservative budget in over 40 years, the largest income tax cut in Ohio history that put more than $2 billion more back in the pockets of Ohio taxpayers. I am a proven budget and tax conservative who's tried to reform the tax code in the state so that we can let people keep more of what they earn to spend and save on their priorities. And that's what I have been about. That's what the record is, and I'm very proud of that record.
It seems like Republicans are walking a real tight line, though, this year between the establishment Ohio Republican Party, which has endorsed you, and this Tea Party movement, which seems to be very angry at the establishment Republican Party. Are there ways to bridge that gap and pull everybody together by November?
Well, I don't really think that the gap is as wide as you characterize it as. I frequently go to Tea Party events. I have a lot of supporters that are Tea Party activists. I give the Tea Party activists credit for really shining a light on this health care bill that the American people strongly reject. I believe that the Tea Party and the traditional voices in the Republican Party are after the same goal. They want a government that's more fiscally disciplined. They want a government that's more responsive to the people of this state and of this nation. They're frustrated by the direction it's going right now, and they want to see real change. And when I am one of the candidates, along with many of the others on our ticket this year, who are going to deliver that.
You will admit that frustration, though, is a lot to do with the Republican Party. A lot of these folks identify themselves as Republicans or former Republicans.
Well, not in my case. We have a very strong relationship with people who share our same frustration with the direction that government's gone, and I see that the goals of the Tea Party and the goals of candidates like me and many others are the same. We want government to be more responsive. We want to have fiscal discipline restored to that government, and we want it to make sure that we're not overburdening the taxpayers of this state.
Secretary of State, to me, is always just such an interesting race because it's obviously the seat plays an important role in our state politics, but I think for so many voters there's kind of a veil around what Secretary of State actually does, what the role is. Obviously you're an established politician in the state, so what's your focus in the campaign? Is your focus on your legislative record, or is it really going to be on getting across to voters your goals for Secretary of State, how you plan to fit into that role versus what you've done so far in the state?
I love the question, because actually one of the first times I said that I was running for Secretary of State, I had a lady come up to me and she said, honey, I'm glad you're running for Secretary of State, because I've got no use for that Hillary Clinton. And I laugh about that because I had to explain, well, that's not the Secretary of State that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Ohio Secretary of State, which is the chief elections official of the state of Ohio, that oversees campaign finance and business filings, has a role in helping to get businesses off the ground and staying focused on those issues and trying to translate that to why it's important to people's lives. Frankly, one of the areas that I believe that we have to restore trust in government through is restoring trust in our elections. You can't act as a partisan, even though the Democrats and the Republicans put up the candidates, they're partisan candidates. You can't conduct yourself in a partisan manner in that office, because if the voters don't trust their elections, they won't trust the government that it elects. And so I think restoring that confidence and maintaining it where we have not had problems, I think are probably the most important job that I'll have to tackle as the Secretary of State of Ohio.
Senator, I want to ask you about Sandra O'Brien. She obviously has a track record as kind of a giant killer, in some ways having knocked off Jeanette Bradley a few years ago, who I don't think anybody gave Sandra O'Brien a chance in that primary. You concerned about that? I mean, does she pose a formidable challenge to you in the primary?
Well, I take every election seriously. That's why I've been out from Ashtabula County to Hamilton County to Washington County to Williams County, all corners and across the state, working very hard, and have received the endorsement of every local county party that's endorsed in this race. The key groups that play a factor in Republican primaries, the pro-Second Amendment, the pro-life, and the groups that support fiscal discipline, NFIB and others. A lot of them have supported what I've been doing in the campaign. Many or all of those groups that I mentioned had endorsed me in some way or the other, and I'm confident that we'll be successful, but we don't take it for granted. We just
Actually, on my YouTube site, I posted a brief clip of former President Ronald Reagan, the last interview that he had with David Brinkley. And Brinkley asked him, as he was leaving office, what he thought the #1 issue, the problem was in the country. And interestingly enough, very quickly he said reapportionment. This is Ronald Reagan back in 1988. He said, when you allow politicians to have an advantage in redrawing lines, it destroys democracy. I know that your efforts here in the state have been to try to find a bipartisan way to have a fair way to redraw those lines. Can we get that done this year? At least allow the people of Ohio to vote on what would be created, I imagine, kind of a completely bipartisan committee to look at legislative and congressional lines.
Well, I agree with President Reagan that it's a major problem in this country, and it's certainly a major problem in this state when you allow the politicians to pick the voters rather than the voters to elect or pick their public officials. And that's why I have been advocating for a bipartisan process as a means for doing this. We passed that out of the Senate last year. It's been pending for over 160 days with only one hearing in the House. I know they've come up with their own alternative. I urge them to pass something that we can then act on in the Senate or concur with. Is incredibly important. I think it's among the most important issues, because as you look at Ohio's budget problems, when you're looking at an $8 billion potential deficit, pension systems that are not actuarially sound, an unemployment compensation system that's unfunded for the future, it's going to take bipartisan solutions. And when you're going to only draw districts in a way that is partisan in terms of their outcome, you're not going to get people working together, because let's face it, you can't take extreme voices from both parties, from the far left and the far right, and very few people in between, and then say, oh, by the way, come to Washington, come to Columbus, and now you're all going to work together even though you have nothing in common. That is a system that is failing us. It's been in the system in place for the last 40 years in the state of Ohio, and it may be only a coincidence, but that's the same period that Ohio's gone on an economic slide where about the time that occurred, the average worker in Ohio started making less than the average worker in America, and it hasn't turned around since then.
Very quickly, do you think you can reach agreement with what the Democratic version is and at least get something to the people to vote on in November?
I'm willing to do that. I've said I'm ready, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, to be able to work on a compromise that's needed to move Ohio in a better direction.
Senator John Husted.